a copy of that recording after the session. And I think we've got quite a lot of people signed up today, but I'm going to let my colleague Lucy just let everyone kind of trickle in, if that's okay. We've got about an hour and quite a bit to get through. So yeah, I'll make a start. So welcome along, everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning. My name is Tess, and I'm joined by my colleague Lucy. We work at the Centre for Sustainable Energy. We're an energy charity based in Bristol. And we're delivering this as a part of the Energy Learning Network, which I'll come on to speak about a bit in a moment. And today is really about looking at different funding options for community energy initiatives. And I just wanted to kind of say from the outset, this webinar, this session was kind of aimed at those relatively new to energy projects. So if you are a really experienced community energy group, you are very, very welcome, but you might find some of the information not sort of as new as some others might. So just to kind of caveat that really. Yeah, we've got a recording right now and we'll share the slides. And we're also going to bring up quite a lot of resources throughout the session. And what we'll do is we'll try and compile that into something that's shareable and usable afterwards as well. That might take us maybe tomorrow or the day after. But yeah. In terms of sort of housekeeping, yeah, please do keep yourselves on mute if that's okay, just to so that we don't have too much background noise. And if you do have any questions kind of as you go, you're welcome to use the chat. Lucy will be monitoring that and she'll either be able to answer that as we go, or we might save some up for the end, or if we can't answer them, we'll try and kind of come back to you at another time if that's okay. So yeah, pop your questions in the chat, or hopefully we'll have a bit of time at the end if anybody wants to kind of voice a question or raise a discussion point. Okie doke. So yeah, as I said, we're delivering this as a part of the Energy Learning Network. So the ELN, abbreviated, is being run by Ashton, and it's a lottery-funded project over 4 years. And the ELN is aiming to kind of power forward community energy projects across the UK, so helping groups that might not have thought about running any energy projects kind of grow and launch, also helping those that are more established. So we're hoping to kind of share lots of insights, resources, connections, and it's across the UK as well, which is really nice. And hopefully it will create benefits for local people as well. So that's kind of where we're kind of coming from. The Energy Learning Network is a really big project. CSE has got one sort of pathway within it. So we hope that we'll be able to share the landing page for the Energy Learning Network with you soon. And that will have all the events that are being run by the partners. So CSE is part of that, but also Community Energy England, Community Energy Wales, Community Energy Scotland, and Action Renewables, who are based in Northern Ireland. So we've got a really big kind of regional spread. Okay, so what we're going to run through is we've kind of categorized or decided to kind of tackle this big topic of funding by categorizing energy projects into kind of 4 different sections. So we've got energy advice, retrofit, community buildings, and more generation projects. We'll then consider some sort of final tips and wider considerations. And then in a month's time, we're going to have a reflective session to lead on from this. And really that's just an opportunity for you to kind of take what you've got from today and bring it somewhere else. And that will be an opportunity to talk more with other peers like yourselves. So yeah, as I said, this session is aimed at those relatively new to the sector. So we're going to give quite a broad overview of what community energy is. So as I said, we've decided to categorize energy projects, and then we're going to explore some case studies around it and some funding that might be available. Today isn't a giant list of funding opportunities, unfortunately, but it's more about approaches that you can kind of take. So that might be looking at things like partnerships. It might help just to understand a bit more broadly about the sector itself and how you as an organisation, whatever level, you know, whether you're a large organisation or a smaller organisation, how you can kind of fit within that. We do have some funding opportunities that we'll highlight, But it's unfortunately not just a list of how you can get loads of funding. It's not quite that simple. And we're using a broad term of what community energy is. So often community energy is synonymous with energy generation and solar and wind, etc. But we want to kind of broaden that a bit and start to think about ways that lots of different groups can get involved. Hence why we've kind of categorized it down into those kind of 4 sections. So this is what we'll kind of explore more broadly, and hopefully it will give you some inspiration about how you might act in each area, if that's where you're acting, or where you might sort of step into if you were interested in sort of broadening or varying the work that you do. So we're going to start with energy advice projects and funding for. So I know that we've got like a really big remit of organisations here, and some of you may already be an energy advice charity, or you might be an advice charity yourself. But we wanted to sort of give some examples of how an energy advice project might work, what activities that might entail. So some examples of that would be, you might be extending existing community advice services into energy. So you might already be an organisation that is advising on debt, or you might be a food bank, or you might be a family advice organisation, and you might want to think about extending that out into more wider energy work. And since the energy crisis a few years ago, that's certainly something that we've seen more funding available for. So that might be something that you might want to think about, sort of broadening your base, I suppose. So some of those things might be sort of bolting on energy advice to the advice that you're already doing, or considering taking some training for yourself or your staff members so that they can engage with the community around energy advice and fuel poverty and energy saving in the home. So that might be things like running energy saving workshops, or having pop-up stalls at a local event, and just sort of being out in the community a bit more to show that there are ways that people can get support if they're struggling with their energy bills. It might include things like energy champion schemes. So these are people in the community that are trained up quite broadly, but trained up about energy advice, and they can give advice on a one-to-one level, or maybe in a group setting, and support people with their fuel bills, their energy bills. You may already be aware of warm hubs that came up a few years ago when the energy crisis was sort of really quite prominent. So that might be creating a warm hub. So that's a space in your community where people who are finding it difficult to heat their home can go during the day, and they can get a hot meal often. That's quite a nice activity to kind of combine the warm hub itself with some energy advice giving as well. It might be things like distributing warm packs, which have blankets and gloves and hats and etc. in to support people in need. And just to say, CSE have a number of resources on how to run some of these activities. So kind of 1 or 2 pages on some things you might want to think about if you're running a workshop or you're going out into the community to give energy advice. So that's kind of what an energy advice project would kind of be. And then how would you think about getting funding for that? Funding for energy advice projects tends to be through grants. So grants are non-refundable, they're usually a bit more flexible, you don't have to pay them back, and most funders want to work with you as an organisation to achieve what's going to work best. But they are a bit more competitive, and they're sometimes harder in that respect to kind of access. So most organisations will offer most funders will offer some sort of support for a grant scheme, so make the most of that, we'd suggest. Another thing to consider is redress funding. So redress funding primarily comes from payments that have been made by energy companies to Ofgem when they've been found to have breached their licence conditions. That funding is then distributed through the Energy Redress Scheme, and that's managed by the Energy Saving Trust. So it's worth looking at the Redress website. They have tutorials and webinars on their schemes, So I'd recommend looking at that. They tend to do them in rounds, so they kind of gather up the funding from certain at a certain time period, and then they distribute it. We'd also recommend for energy advice projects looking at your DNO, your district network operator, and GDNs, your gas distribution network. I've got a map in a moment. But again, these organisations often have funding that's available to administer to local groups. It's worth checking with your local net zero hub or local council website as well, because sometimes the local council will want to work with community kind of partners that are very well connected to their residents in their locality. And yeah, it's kind of grants are a good way to kind of build your reputation. It might lead to something more substantial, like running a particular service, an energy advice service for a local authority, for example. So they're a good one to get started with. We've got a link there to the government grant service, which is like a portal which you can use to search as well. So this is the map of the DNOs and the GDNs. So it's worth looking where you are and who is your kind of corresponding operator. They don't just have funding for fuel poverty projects, they also have some sort of wider, more community energy orientated ideas as well. And as you can see, they have a huge coverage across the UK. So hopefully within your remit, within your locality, you might be able to connect to one of these organisations. And often if you can forge a good relationship with them, it might lead to more funding. And then this is an example of a group that has been funded through SGN, so that's the Scottish Gas Networks. So principally they were a community drug and alcohol support service, so not an energy charity at all, but they were able to branch out with some funding from SGN, from Scottish Gas Networks, to train up some staff members around energy advice and provide more one-to-one support for the people kind of in their centres and people that they're working with on a more clinical level. They were able to provide support to sign up to things like the Priority Services Register, which is for vulnerable people to sign up to if there's a power cut, etc. They get priority treatment. And also educate their community around carbon monoxide safety, which is something that I'm sure you're aware a gas network operator would want to kind of support. So the SGN scheme is currently closed, but it may well open. And then Northern Gas Networks also have a very similar fund. So it's just a nice way of, you might not be a community energy charity to start with, but you might be thinking about branching into energy more widely. You can use your advice skills that you've already got, you just sort of lend it to a different topic, I suppose. So that's just one example of how a community organisation has used that. And then another fund that is open, that we're administering, closes at the end of March, is the Smart Energy Affordability Fund. This is being run by the National Grid, and it's for non-profits supporting vulnerable households to benefit from low carbon or smart technologies. And it's across the network area that I've shown here. So hopefully some of you might fit within that sort of Southwest England, the Midlands and South Wales. Grants between 30,000 and 40,000, so quite a generous funds available. And the really nice thing is that you can submit a joint application with potentially a local advice charity or energy organisation. So they actually welcome partnerships, and that's probably one of our big tips in this webinar, in this session, is think about who you can partner with. So if you know of an organisation local to you that's giving advice and you're more of a community-based, you might be quite small, you might think of partnering with them on something like this to reach out to your community. So that's live and available, and we'll send out any links afterwards as well. So that's energy advice. Hopefully that's given you a flavour of what some of the things you might do and a couple of funds that you might find helpful, but also just thinking about, redress funding from local council, kind of where you might explore those opportunities. So now we're going to go on to our second sort of category, and this is funding for domestic retrofit. So retrofit being improvements to buildings with regards to energy efficiency. So this is quite an emerging kind of area. It's definitely something that's becoming more funded, more fundable. You might not be a retrofit organisation yourself, but again, this idea of partnerships and needing to get out to the community is a key part of engaging with people. So just some examples of some things that might happen in a retrofit kind of project or activity. They might be things like surveys. So someone might go to someone's house and give them a survey of what they might need to do to increase their energy efficiency. There might be small measures they could do, such as draft proofing. There might be place-based initiatives that are maybe street-wide. Also things like training provision and coordination. There's an organisation called People Powered Retrofit that do lots and lots of training for people on retrofit more widely. So these activities are often delivered by potentially more specialist groups or groups that are set up specifically around retrofit, but they often need partnerships to get that support to the doorway, if that makes sense. So if you're a smaller community group, but you're really, really well engaged and you know your community really well, an idea might be to partner with a slightly different organisation to kind of, combine. We have, we made a report a few years ago, Community Retrofit Guide, which is there, which we'll share, and it's a really nice guide to how you might work within this space. And just a highlight from that really is just that community groups can play a really key role in supporting households to be aware of retrofit. So even if you're not a specialist retrofit assessor or advisor, your knowledge of your community is actually going to be really key in driving these kind of projects forward. And there's more and more funding available for it because lots of local authorities need to help to increase the energy efficiency of their local building stock and help people to reduce their fuel bills. So take a look at that guide if you can. And this is really just to show that this is like an emerging sector of work. So worth thinking about how you might want to engage with it. So this graph here just kind of shows the variety of groups that are taking on this role. So some of them are community benefit societies, some of them are charities, some of them are companies as well. It's quite varied, but it just shows that this is kind of an emerging area of work that funders are interested in, local authorities are interested in. And I thought it was quite interesting to kind of pull out the main reasons why organisations are doing this work. And this is all in a separate report that we've written, and we can share that with you, the role of non-profit organisations in retrofit services. And the main reasons just show, the breadth and the kind of how your aims might not be specifically retrofit based. So main reasons for being involved in this space are tackling the climate crisis, supporting the reduction of energy consumption, supporting people with fuel bills, but also building kind of community-centered neighborhoods, kind of scale approaches to addressing community needs. So again, we can share this report, but it kind of, encapsulates how important community engagement is in any retrofit kind of project. So just to be aware that this is an emerging kind of funding opportunity that you may be able to engage with. And our kind of case study to highlight this is one which was run under the very snappy title of Local Energy Area Demonstrator, or LEAD projects. So this was funding from the government for 36 different projects across England. And the idea was to try and sort of find innovative approaches to energy efficiency in the local communities. So CSE was one of the lead project kind of partners, or kind of managed the project, but we worked with some smaller groups, so Climate and Community Action Dundry. Dundry is a small village outside Bristol, and Sustainable Clevedon. And we hosted what we called not yet green open homes visits. So this is really an idea for a project as opposed to funding itself. But basically a green open homes or a not yet green open homes event encourages people to visit local properties and hear from the householder about how it went, what are the benefits, what are the realities of retrofit and the installation process. So it's a really nice way to kind of share expertise at a community level. So the lead projects, as I said, there's 36 of them across the country. As far as I know, they're coming towards the end of their funding spend, but it might be worth looking at one of the 36 projects that may or may not be near to you and seeing if there's any follow-on from it. If you are a community organisation and you're really well connected to your residents, something like the Green Open Homes model is a really nice way to get people involved, engaged on retrofit. So that's kind of an example of a retrofit partnership, I suppose. And there may well be more funding from government from this. So it's, yeah, it could be something that a local group with local knowledge can help run. And then I also wanted to say something about the self-funded market. So there is more interest in retrofitting homes just generally. People, for lots of different reasons, want to reduce their energy consumption, but that also might be carbon-based. Lots of people want to reduce their carbon emissions. So there is a group of people who are able to pay for those measures themselves, but they might need help navigating that pathway or that journey. So another example is being run by Plymouth Energy Community, or PEC, and they're running retrofit surveys through their Future Fit programme. Again, you might not have the expertise to run those surveys, but you might be well connected to the groups that do want to find those. So again, that's thinking about those lead projects and where maybe slightly larger organisations are looking to engage with the communities at a grassroots level. There's a list of the 36 successful projects as well that we can share. And then these are just two kind of nice resources or nice maps that you could use. So the top one is from Community Energy England. It also includes some sites in Wales and Northern Ireland. And then there's one from Local Energy Scotland as well. And this has mapped out local energy groups. And again, it might be worth considering which ones are near you and which ones you might want to engage with. So they might be well established, but they might need help with outreach and promotion. And you can kind of use the filters on the maps to kind of find the projects near you. So it can be quite difficult for non-specialist groups to get specific retrofit project funding if you don't have those skills, but partnerships might be a way that you can kind of enter that space without needing that knowledge, and then you might grow and sort of learn from any groups that are a bit more established as well. And then in terms of funding, so the net zero hubs might be helpful. They often administer government funding, and so the net zero hubs are based in England, and there are 5 regional bodies that were set up originally around a specific fund, but they've kind of stayed in place in situ, I suppose, to help administer projects that are going to help those specific regions decarbonise. So it's worth knowing about your local hub. We've listed them there. And then there are also, it's not quite the same model, but there are kind of Scottish and Welsh versions of that as well. So yeah, again, these might be organisations that kind of sub-hold funding from central government. And then I also wanted to talk a bit about funding for householder retrofit. So I wanted to make a distinction between funding for a project, a retrofit project, and then funding for households. So there's government funding through certain schemes, for example, ECO or ECO4, which stands for the Energy Company Obligation, and that's delivering energy efficiency measures to low-income households. And whilst this funding isn't accessible by an organisation, knowing it exists might help you enter certain spaces to help promote the access to this funding. So the scheme is funded by government, and I think it's going till 2026. So you might not be able to get the funding in your bank account, but you might have a role in helping your community access these, and knowledge about these kind of funds might help bolster a project plan, just general understanding of retrofit more widely. So yeah, it's worth kind of understanding. It's quite complex, but it's worth knowing that these grants exist. And I think it's Nest that have the kind of equivalent for Wales, and Home Energy Scotland for Scotland. We've got this quite detailed slide here, which kind of shows the funding and where it's relevant. So I guess the key point here is that the landscape for households is quite complex and it often changes, but the big ones to note are ECO, Great British Insulation Scheme, and Connected for Warmth. So I guess our advice would be to check with if there are any energy providers near you that are administering this funding or these services, to understand who they are and whether you can play a role in getting that kind of word out, I suppose, to groups, to organisations like yourselves that might be able to help homeowners. Okay, just moving on to community buildings. Just going to take a sip of water. So there were a couple of you that said it would be good to understand a bit more about funding for community buildings, which is great. So again, this is why we kind of categorize them, because we see them as quite distinct areas that are gaining more interest from investors and funders and communities alike. So community buildings, if you own one or you lease one or you do lots of your activities in them, you'll know that they are a really important space for your community activities, whether that's for your food banks or for, you know, toddler groups or whatever it is. They're really important spaces to protect. Probably why there's a bit more interest in funding them, because they give us so much social value. We also know that communities want to respond to both the climate crisis, so they want to reduce their energy bills and their carbon emissions, but they also want to sustain themselves and keep the buildings open and not spend too much money, and help people around the cost of living as well. So as I said, they're often hosting essential services like food banks or warm hubs or just sort of general community activities. And there's a report here that I've just highlighted that 3 in 5 community buildings in the most deprived areas in England don't reach basic energy efficiency needs. So, you know, it is a problem, it is an issue, and it does need that funding to kind of, yeah, keep them open, keep them going. Also a note that, and a reason why there might be more interest in it from a funding perspective, is that community buildings are going to be seen as more of a part of our adaptation to climate change. So as a place of refuge during flooding or heat waves. So yeah, they're really special, and hopefully lots of you already know that, but it's an area that funders are more and more interested in for that reason. We need to maintain them for a number of social kind of reasons. So this is an example. These are the examples of kind of activities that are related to community buildings. So these might be things that you might want to get funding for. So they might form part of your kind of like project plan or project ideas. And this could be auditing and wider community involvement. So CSE actually have a a walk around community buildings audit that you're very welcome to use. And if you can involve people within that as well, we always recommend that that's the best thing you can do. So that might be auditing a local village hall or church or wherever that space is, to really understand what the needs are, what the critical needs are for your building. It could be looking at another activity. It could be looking at renewable energy installation, so putting solar panels on the top of your roof if that's viable, or thinking about other kind of low carbon technologies too. And another activity or another idea is to run green open community buildings, so a similar model to green open homes, but for community spaces. So as we said, retrofit is kind of an emerging, there's a lot more people interested in retrofit more widely. And if you can bring that into your community building, then that's a nice example of some of those activities. So I've got a couple or one case study to highlight. And I think community building retrofit is something that does take time. So this whole project, just to sort of illustrate that, took, I think, over 3 years from start to finish. So Caxton House is a community centre in North London, and they host 6 other charities, 6 other not-for-profit organisations. It's a really nice example of a partnership between a more established community energy group, which is Power Up North London, and a completely separate community organisation. So Power Up North London are a community energy group, and they deliver lots of decarbonisation projects, and they try and tackle fuel poverty as well. So there was a partnership between these 2 organisations. As we said before, sometimes it's really good to look out for those energy groups that are near you and see if you can collaborate. Over the 3 years, they had a feasibility report of their building, again, to understand what they needed to do to reduce their energy demand. And they managed to get a number of things done. So new lighting, windows, air source heat pump, and a ventilation system as well. And it was funded through a variety of different funds. So London Community Energy Fund, Community Council Infrastructure Levy, and Islington Community Energy Fund as well. So it's unlikely that a community building project would be funded from one single source. There may be examples out there, and I'm very happy to hear about them, but the nature of doing up a community building in terms of an energy project, it just takes lots of time, and there's lots of things to consider as well. So I guess this is just an example of, don't feel disheartened or that you can't get anywhere if you've only got a little bit of funding to start with. It might just be a little bit to get you going, and then it might lead to other things. If you're also partnering with another organisation, that can just bring in lots more expertise as well. So the total cost of all those measures that I just listed was about £300,000, which is not a small amount of money, but over the 3 years, it's something they picked up kind of here and there. They've got a really nice case study on their website, which again, we can share, and it's documented their whole journey. So from just starting up, thinking about, okay, let's get an audit done, let's get a few more ideas about how we can help our community space, all the way through to them sort of being able to detail how much carbon they've saved and how other project has been. So I guess our point around funding for community buildings is that it's not necessarily easy or short term, but hopefully case studies like this can be a bit of an inspiration to keep you going on that kind of train or pathway, I suppose. So another kind of aspect to community buildings would be to partner with someone like Big Solar Co-op. So Big Solar Co-op will install solar on community spaces and schools and businesses. And I guess this is an example of not necessarily funding in itself, but it is an energy project that you could run without having to build the capital to pay for the solar panels, for example. So Big Solar Co-op will, if your roof is viable and that they will work with you to figure that out, will install and maintain the panels on your roof, and you'd agree a particular contract length for that. And then you would be able to broker a deal with them about the electricity that is that you harness from your solar panels back to you as the site. So potentially you can get cheaper energy, but it's also a really nice kind of piece around sustainability more widely, engaging with your community about what solar panels do and the advantages of that. So the example that we've got is it's actually a medical practice, so it doesn't necessarily need to be a community building. If you are not in a community building, or you don't own it or lease it, you might know of a school or a business that might want to partner with you to on one of these kind of projects. So the medical practice was able to have that installed, and it meets 50% of their energy needs. So there's a saving for you there with regards to your energy bills. Big Solar Co-op will offer that kind of technical support, that legal support, but they often need to partner with community groups to be the kind of broker between the building and Big Solar Co-op, I guess. So you might not have the expertise, the knowledge, the time, the capacity to run your own solar project, and that's fine. That's where organizations like Big Solar Co-op could potentially step in and help you. And who knows what you'll learn from that and what it might bring as well. So they often need established groups to help drive the installation forward, to negotiate with the community in that building, whoever it is, whether it's a business or a school. And then sort of similarly, in a similar model, this is specifically for schools. So again, if you are not in a community building yourself, but you know of a school that might benefit, Solar for Schools is a similar setup. They offer kind of a zero capital costs option for schools themselves. We know that schools don't have much time or capacity because they're very busy places. So Solar for Schools can take a lot of that workload off of the schools. They work with the district network operator to apply for the power for the solar to be connected to the grid, etc. They'll do the surveys. They also provide engagement with schools as well. So they'll work with a variety of groups, community energy groups or otherwise. So it could be worth, again, this isn't about specific funding in your bank, but this is an energy project that you might want to kind of take a hold of. It might be worth inquiring with a local school about running a project. There's some really nice examples on their website of schools they've worked with. Schools are often a really great place for solar as well because they often have that larger roof space. Okay, so this is a bit of a summary of where you might look to with regards to funding for your community building, aside from partnering with someone like a Big Solar Co-op. So if you are in a position, you can get loans and part grants. There's one out at the moment called the Energy Resilience Fund. It is England only. I think it's 60% loan and 40% grant. So you could, for example, and what some groups are thinking of doing is the 40% that's the grant may well help you reduce your energy costs so much that paying the loan back seems a lot more viable. So if you can take that 40% and improve your community space, you can then hire out the space more often and build more revenue from that, then the loan becomes a little bit more manageable. Not suitable for everyone, but it is an option for community buildings. Similarly, Big Issue Invest run a similar scheme, and that is UK wide. And then a few sort of funds or things to think about if you are kind of more present in your village hall or community building. So ACRE, hopefully some of you have heard of ACRE, so that's Action with Communities in Rural England. They're quite a good base, particularly around village halls, accessing funding for their community space. There's the Architectural Heritage Fund. If you are in a traditional building, you can actually access a feasibility grant that will help you understand what needs to happen to your building in the first place, and then a capital grant to do the things that need doing, if that makes sense. We'll share all of these. These are just examples that we wanted to highlight. Historic England, they also have some grants available. There's a repair grant out at the moment. So if you need maintenance and repair done to a church or another historic building, that might be appropriate. Another thing to think about with village halls is commercial and renewable energy companies. So Thrive Renewables, for example, they're UK-wide. And if you're within a proximity of one of their Thrive sites, they have a community benefit scheme that we at CSE run. And just other community renewable energy companies often have like a corporate social responsibility fund. And they want to engage with communities where their renewable sites are, for obvious reasons. So it might be worth thinking about who is your local, who owns the local wind turbines, who owns the local solar farm, and seeing if there are any opportunities there. And then more specifically for churches, that's just a list: National Churches Trust, and there's a heritage fund with the lottery, and there's also an organisation called Eco Church, who, as well as administering and signposting funds, also have quite a lot of good resources on churches and how to find funding for retrofit schemes as well, because churches are often a little bit more tricky because they're a bit older, etc. So yeah, those are worth checking out. Okay, so now moving on to our kind of last section, I suppose. And this is funding for energy generation. So I think I said at the beginning, if you're a community energy group and you're really well established, it's great to have you here. But I'm probably not telling you anything particularly interesting. But if you want to share any of your learnings from how you have got your funding together for generating energy, then please do let us know in the chat, and perhaps we'll have a bit of time towards the end as well. Okay, so through generation, you could consider kind of any renewable or low carbon tech in principle. So this could be solar, it could be wind, hydro and heat networks are a little bit more kind of complicated, but it's still an emerging area. So one sort of example we've pulled out is from Energy Local, Bridport, and they've got a community wind turbine. And they actually, oh, whoops, moved on a slide. They actually, as far as I know, they got a fund of about £15,000 from Power to Change. And that kind of started them off on their kind of journey towards getting this wind turbine in place. So £15,000, it's not a really small amount of money, but you know, it's not a crazy amount either. So I guess that's quite a good example of, you can kind of start somewhere with one fund and it leads on. So you do need, if you're going to enter into this kind of area in terms of a project, you do need quite a solid kind of business case, business plan. You need a clear vision for what your project is going to be or do. So sometimes that's where feasibility funding is really key, because any big infrastructure project is going to have quite a lot of things to consider, things to think about. So if you do kind of enter into that world, should you want to, it's just something to bear in mind, I guess. The Bridport is quite an interesting sort of case study of their journey developing the wind project. As far as I know, the turbine is privately owned, but they've created a way for local residents to benefit from its installation. So local residents can become part of a club, the Bridport Wind Turbine Club, and they can benefit from different prices at different times, so that if they match their energy use to certain parts of the day, then they can get a better rate, basically. So yeah, I guess it's just an example of different ways that you could run a generation project. yeah, increasingly like community groups and local authorities are at all scales looking at how we can change our energy system. So again, this might be an area that where more funding starts to emerge. But if you're not an energy organization in and of yourself, as I said, you could look at that map that we showed you earlier and think about, okay, what is going on in my community, and how can we get involved more widely? And then if you do think about entering into more generation kind of projects, there are lots of different ways that you can finance this. So you can raise shares for your community project, and you can do this through crowdfunding. Often crowdfunding happens at like the feasibility or the startup of a project. Again, as I said, you would need that kind of clear plan or goal, and so that people contributing to your crowdfunding pot knowing really clearly what they're donating toward. And then if you want to raise more, you can do a community share offer. Sometimes these start as a little as like £100, and people then get voting rights within the cooperative. This kind of setup is only really available to certain structures of organisations, so cooperatives or community benefit societies, for example. I just wanted to highlight that raising community finance and sort of investment is not necessarily an easy task, and it might require a new legal structure. So we would recommend if you were going down this route, you'd get financial advice as well, particularly if you're taking on anything like a loan as well. There's a good webinar on community shares in more detail from Community Energy England if you're interested in learning a bit more about that. It's not as easy as just getting funding and chucking up the solar panels, which I'm sure anyone from a community energy group will agree with. But that doesn't mean that you can't look into it. It doesn't mean that you can't find out what projects are going on near you. It's just to be aware that they can take time. And then here is sort of some funding opportunities for generation projects that might be useful. The Community Energy Fund that has been run by the Net Zero Hubs has actually now closed, but it is worth looking out for this in the future, because we have a new government who have a local power plan, and that might mean that more funding is available through the hubs around community energy, we hope. Yeah, and this is really just a list. I won't read them all out, but if you're looking at kind of feasibility aspects or seed funding to test out projects, Thrive Renewables have an opportunity there. And then all of these organizations kind of help groups kind of facilitate that kind of community-owned model of renewable energy. So they might help you raise shares on a specific platform. They might help you with the administration side of things, the bookkeeping side of things. So there are organizations there that are there to help. You don't feel like you have to kind of set up an energy project just on your own back, sort of thing. There's lots of groups out there that want to invest in this kind of thing. Okay, coming towards the end and kind of wrapping things up, and then hopefully we'll have a bit of time for sharing and for discussion. So I guess these are just more of our kind of wider considerations or wider tips. So if you're thinking about your grant applications that you may or may not be doing right now, because that's often a very common task for community groups, is to think of it a bit like a job application, checking that you'll make sure that you are eligible. Are you in the right postcode? Are you in the right area? Research the funder. So often, as I said right at the beginning when we were talking about energy advice, funders will offer like webinars or support sessions. Try and go to them if you can, as many as you can, and contact them and have a chat with them. Like they shouldn't be seen as people who are you just give them your application and then you turn around. It's important, I think, to engage with the funder as much as you can. These are other kind of wider tips around grants. So just really being clear about your aims and your activities, showing what the impact your organisation is already having or doing, and then why you're in a position to deliver this work more widely. And that applies not just to energy advice, but if you're looking at getting funding for your community space, if you're looking at getting funding to reach out to groups about retrofit, try and understand, like we've given a lot of reports and things that you can research to really understand why funders are interested in those specific parts of energy projects. Yeah, other tips around just showing good value for money, a good budget, good quotes, etc. If you're applying for a community building retrofit capital cost, you want to show that you've sought good quotes and you've understood the installers that are going to potentially be helping you out. And then these are just some sort of wider tips. So I think I've said it lots, but network and connect with local organisations as much as you can. You might not find funding straight away, but just making that connection with them might mean that you can work on a project together. So yeah, partnership organisation might lead to other opportunities. It's also a good way to build your reputation with your community members yourself, but also with other organisations and other funders. If you can join local networks, so Community Energy England, Wales and Scotland, you can have there's memberships of these groups, so you can be members in different kind of tiers if you like. Even if you're an unincorporated group, you're not a community energy group, you can still be part of a lot of the support that those networks give you. And more widely, if you are thinking of those kind of wider energy projects, you might just want to start with where your expertise lie. So if you're an advice charity, you know that you're really good at giving advice, but you want to enter into that energy space, a really nice stepping stone would be to continue your advice, but bolster that with energy advice. So you then learn a little bit more about energy, you might make more connections with other groups that are doing other things around energy. But if you start with what you know and where your expertise are, you're more likely to have success, as we think. And then just thinking about the breadth, as I said right at the beginning, of what a community energy project is. It's not just generation, it's not just solar panels and wind turbines. It also is those things, but thinking about advice, retrofit, community spaces, engaging with schools, engaging with businesses. We really, through the Energy Learning Network, we do want to encourage that kind of wider remit of what an energy project is. And then this is really just a table to kind of summarize your type of project and then your kind of funding options therein. So energy advice projects would really recommend looking at your DNOs and your delivery networks, your gas delivery networks, and any local authority funding as well. As I said, local authorities often need community groups to partner with to try and get their support out there. If you're looking more at kind of the retrofit aspect, have a look through the net zero hubs, maybe thinking about more of the kind of feasibility funding, and consider partnering with already established community groups or already established retrofit groups that have that specialist kind of skill or knowledge. Community building retrofit, there are some grants out there. I hope the ones that we listed will be helpful to you. You can also get loans. That's not an option for everyone, but just be aware that they do exist, and lots of investors, lots of social investors are really interested in this, this kind of sector. And then energy generation, you might not be in a position to do it yourself. You might think about partnering. There are opportunities to raise shares for this. And just a note that often with a generation project, you need different kinds of funding at different stages of development as well. And the local power plan, which I mentioned briefly, might bring more options. So we hope, we're not quite sure how it's going to be administered, but we hope there's more funding for community energy more widely, and that will be available to community energy groups and community organisations alike, because we need people to be able to be in their kind of places, in their grassroots, neighbourhoods to be able to make these projects successful. Okay, and then we will send all this in a follow-up, but there's some further resources. Community Energy, CSE have our own page on funding for community energy projects. So it's a 1 or 2 pager, I think. It's quite a good sort of summary of what we've discussed today. So we'll send that out. Community Energy England have a funding opportunities page. I think it's wider than England as well, if you are in Wales, Scotland, or Northern Ireland. They update it really regularly. They do a fantastic job of it. So I'd recommend looking at that. And that's not just necessarily community energy projects, it's wider aspects too. Similarly, Community Energy Scotland and Community Energy Wales and Action Renewables, their sites are there as well if you are based near them. And yeah, these are just a few more resources. So we do have Funding Energy Improvements in Community Buildings, a guide, which for those of you that were specifically interested around the community buildings aspect, it's a really nice guide that kind of walks you through where you need to start and where you could gain from some funding as well. Yeah, and we also have a guide on wider energy projects as well, which hopefully kind of chunk everything into 1 or 2 pages. Okay, so I just wanted to take the last last few minutes or so to thinking about our reflective session. So I appreciate we've delivered a lot of information this morning. I don't expect you to kind of swallow it all, but the reflective session is really an opportunity for you to do that. So it's in about a month's time. We'll ask you to come kind of prepped or prepared with the following questions, which I'll go through in a moment. The reflective sessions are really just an opportunity for you to speak, for us to speak less, for me to speak less, and to meet other groups. So the last session we did, we were in breakout rooms, and we each participant had a role that they needed to fulfill. And it proved to be a really nice way for people to collaborate and learn from each other. So there are so many webinars out there, which is great, but sometimes we don't have enough opportunity to reflect afterwards. So that's what we hope to achieve with this. We will send out the sign up to that soon, but what we'll get you to think about is what's your kind of idea around your next energy project? Where does it slot into out of those 4? Thinking about things that have been successful from previous funded projects, things that you've learned from funding applications and from your projects, and then also your biggest challenge in securing that funding. And we'll send a form with the registration link so that we can kind of filter people into the right categories. And we're hoping to facilitate a session where you can help people with the topic you know about most, and then also be in a breakout room where you want to know more about a specific topic from someone else. So we're hopefully doing a bit of matchmaking, I guess, within this reflective session. That is it from me. I can see there's lots of activities in the chat. I don't know whether they are specific questions or whether you're all just helping you out. But we can definitely save the chat as well. I'll just stop sharing. So was there anything else anyone wanted to highlight or raise or discuss? If you do want to let us know, then please do. Got a few minutes. You're welcome to. Some people are saying that they've got to go. That's fine. Yeah, we will save the chat so we can see there's been lots of activity.
Could I ask a question, Tess?
Hello, yes.
This is Anderson, if it's not picked up.
Yeah.
About the church funding. It's a question I did ask in the chat. Is there any restrictions of denomination? So is it just for C of E, Methodist, Baptist?
I'm not sure. And so the 3 organisations that we mentioned, the 3 sort of funding streams that we mentioned, I
Yeah.
think would have more detail on that themselves. I know that
Okay.
sometimes certain churches need approval from like dioceses for community
Yeah.
building, yeah, changes. So yeah, I'm not sure if the funding is restricted to certain groups or denominations, I'm afraid. I can try and find
Okay.
out. I
Yeah,
don't
I'll
know
have a.
the answers.
Thank you for that.
Okay, sorry. Or if anyone else is known. I wouldn't have thought so. But yeah. Any other points? We'll try and pull everything together. Yeah, hopefully it was food for thought, not too much. Hopefully it wasn't too daunting. I think Lucy's got a survey, which we can pop in the chat. That's just to let us know what your thoughts were, but also what you'd like to see in the future as well. So I think that can go in the chat.
I'm going to say thank you and goodbye, and I look forward to seeing you on the 26th.
Awesome. Thanks very
Thank you.
much, Anderson. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye. Yeah, if you do have the opportunity to fill in the survey, that would be great. If not, we'll hopefully see you soon. Thanks. Bye. I will end us there.